everything? Oh, I'll just say got it then. All right, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome all to our Zoom presentation on a Saturday night. Tonight, we are fortunate to have a young and talented artist, Mr. Brandon Wang, to join us and to share with us his perspective on films and art in general. Brandon studied film in college, and he just graduated from Emory University a few months ago. Art has been a big part of Brandon's life as he was growing up. Besides cello, reading, sports, and other things, he was particularly fascinated by movies. Though he wasn't an average action movie loving teenager, he enjoyed a wide range of movie genres, like comedy, adventure, romance, you name it. With his film class works in college, during his college years, and with more like broad movie viewings, he has become more drawn to dramatic and artistic movies, especially the creative side of such works. I'm going to say something that might embarrass him, though. We, I.E. and Shushu, who have met Brandon in person, we all unanimously agree that Brandon is as handsome and charismatic as any movie star, but he insists that acting is not his cup of tea. He enjoys the creative process much more. I'd like to share one more fun fact before turning over the podium to Brandon. Last month, when I met with him, we discussed about movies and exchanged some ideas. To my surprise, his taste on movies is very similar to mine. Like we both enjoy cleverly crafted suspense thriller or a well-told human interest stories, things like that. So to me, his insight and wisdom are way beyond his years. So when I invited him to give us a talk and he accepted it, I was super thrilled. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Brandon Wang. I guess most people are on mute. You don't hear the claps. So the floor is yours. Just go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. That was definitely a wonderful introduction, although probably an undeserving one. Thank you, everyone, for coming to my presentation. This presentation is a bit of a lengthy one, but definitely regarding subject matter that's deeply important to me, and definitely kind of offers some more insight into kind of my thoughts on general trends in art and film in particular. I think personally speaking, looking at the history of various art forms is just important as consuming different arts. And so for the purposes of this presentation, it's really to give kind of a well-rounded look at film history, and then comparing some general evolutionary trends with other art forms that sort of mirror the timeline of cinema. So without further ado, I'm gonna jump right into the presentation, seeing as it's quite a lengthy one. So again, the subject matter of my presentation is medium evolution in film and art. Yeah. There we go. So, a brief disclaimer, because again, I'm talking about a subject that has a lot of wide varying opinions, and a lot of people may disagree with me. And I think generally speaking, my positions are pretty, they kind of go along the grain. I think they're mostly what people agree with. And but I still want to make a disclaimer because a few things definitely are important to address. I'm not an expert, necessarily speaking, in art history or film history. And my analysis of these trends result primarily from my own observations. The presentation will be skewed primarily towards Western culture and film and art, because again, I'm raised in that tradition. And so in speaking about Western film, I think I'm most comfortable speaking about that. And during this presentation, I'll be giving a few predictions regarding the artistic trends that I anticipate in the future, which may or may not be accurate, but it's worth addressing and something I do like to do, which is speculation about the future of art. So yeah, these are just a few disclaimers. So the table of contents of my presentation today. First, we're going to talk with about a bit of an overview of art forms. We're going to go into an introduction to cinema, basically the basic aspects of cinema. We're going to then go into kind of a very quick, brief history of cinema, just very, it skims the surface, I think, of cinema a lot. And I only really talk about the films that I think were most critical to the certain eras in which they occupied. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the overview of cinema, kind of in a basic analysis of how it compares to the other art forms and the other art histories that have come before it. And then finally, I'm going to field a few questions if anyone does have questions. Okay, so to begin with, I think everyone is somewhat familiar with the various art forms that are kind of the most popular, the most ubiquitously known. Everyone knows what these art forms are. So for instance, number one, we have painting, which I think is an art form that has existed since 40,000 BC. So again, a very, very long art form that has evolved greatly over its lifetime. And similarly with sculpture, again, I think those visual art forms kind of evolve somewhat concurrently. They evolve somewhat simultaneously. And then we have literature. Of course, literature is probably one of the most esteemed art forms there are, just in terms of the expressive capability of literature, the descriptive ability of literature. And so it's really one of the peak art forms that we have in order to kind of express human instincts and desires and emotions. And of course, we have architecture, which is obviously important in terms of construction of buildings and the artistic creative liberties that someone can take in constructing larger structure. And we have music, which is obviously important to me because I am also a cellist. And so I have a pretty big background in classical music. And then we have theater, which is kind of the predecessor to cinema, wherein people will act out a play and kind of the emotions involved with the play. And then we have cinema. So here are a few pictures. I think I'll just briefly go over it. In the center, we have a painting by Picasso called Guernica. And this was during, I believe it was the Spanish Civil War or some Spanish War. And it's basically highlighting the atrocities that occurred because of this event. And I think it's deeply resonant and emotional to me, just because of the kind of pain and suffering that it elicits when you kind of look at it. And then we have The Tempest, which is one of Shakespeare's plays, actually one of his last plays. I thought it was fitting to include a piece of literature and theater that exemplifies the best of Shakespeare. And then we have Tchaikovsky No. 4 Symphony, which is something that I actually played with my orchestra. So the reasons why I chose these, one of them was because they all represent different periods of time and different types of art forms. So Guernica is actually a modern expression of painting. The Tempest is a play that came from early modern English era, which is roughly the late 1400s. And Tchaikovsky is an example of Romanticism, which is 19th century. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone over a very high-level overview of art, I'd like to introduce a few elements of cinema that I think are very much important to cinema and that need to be addressed before anyone kind of goes into the deep with the art form. So in terms of its similarities to other art forms and its differences, I think the biggest thing is that it's a very new art form, which is to say that it's the first film that actually was introduced was in the late 19th century. So that's late 1800s. And so what we have is, an art form that is extremely new compared to most others. So for instance, like I said, paintings 40,000 BC and literature 3000 BC was the first manuscript that we have of anything written, and 50,000 BC for music. Yeah, which is pretty absurd in terms of how new it is comparatively to those. And another thing that I wanted to bring up actually was its similarity to another comparatively new art form, such as graphic novels or comics. Again, I felt like it needed to be talked about because I think most people disregard it as a legitimate art form. But basically, the idea is that, in a relatively new art form, you can always innovate. It's easier to innovate. And so in terms of comic books, a great example is a graphic novelist by the name of Neil Gaiman, who innovated in that space because he felt like other spaces were more saturated. So other art forms like literature already have really great works of literature. So that's essentially his reasoning of going into graphic novels. And I think that was really relevant. I think cinema, as you'll see with my argument, is that cinema is also one that is beginning to be very much an industry that is saturated with a lot of different films. And I think because there are so many, it's difficult. It's beginning to be difficult to innovate in that space. But as it says in my presentation, film was initially viewed as a spectacle. It was initially viewed as a very basic form of entertainment, something that was not to be taken seriously because a lot of very creative people didn't want to go into film, mostly because it was just seen as something to be entertained by, not to be treated as a serious art form. But of course, now we know with retrospect that film is actually very important to society at large, I would say. And it teaches us a lot about ourselves and is very much a respected art form in the modern 21st century. So in many ways, film is a successor to theater. I touched on this, and it's more easily commodifiable and accessible than theater, which means that it can be transferred to your phone much easier than a theatrical play can, or it can be transferred to your TV very quickly compared to a theatrical play. But one thing to keep in mind is that it is also somewhat indebted to theater in terms of an art form. So it's very much taken a lot of elements from theater and made it its own. So I think in that way, it is pretty interesting when we look at cinema, how it's actually somewhat of a child of theater. I think is really cool. And finally, film specializes where other art forms can't. So film is a visual, very much immersive experience. I think, when you're watching a film, the whole point is to be engrossed and captivated by the narrative until it's over. So to be really transported into a world, and then when it's over, feel like it was a really complete experience, right? I think that's really the essence of film. And I also think, for instance, film can do a lot of different things that's unique to its own medium, which is, as an example, editing, visual effects, cinematography. All of those are just unique to cinema specifically. So in addition to that, I think some genres of filmmaking really appeal to the format of cinema and don't really appeal to other art forms. So obviously drama and romance are art forms that are pretty much known throughout all forms of literature, theater, etc. But I think what film does better is that it deals with the subtlety of emotions, and you can really do that by capturing kind of the face in sort of a close-up, whereas in theatrical plays, it's very much difficult, I think, to even see people's emotions. And generally in theater, you have to act very dramatically. You have to gesture a lot. You have to use your hands to explain to the audience what you're feeling, versus film that can do it very much more authentically with a lot more nuance. And I think that's really important to the medium. In addition, I think comedy has been reinvented with film as well. I think there's slapstick, gross out features that other art forms can't really mimic. And especially these other ones, science fiction, superheroes, fantasy, obviously no other medium can do visual effects to nearly the same degree, as well as costume design and war and westerns, set building and costume design. And then these other ones as well, action, adventure, crime, gangster, horror, and thriller, all of which are highly dependent on the set design. So in that capacity, theater is actually very much limited. And in literature, I think is very much limited because you don't really have the visual medium to explain to you why certain things matter, why we should care about action and adventure in kind of a film medium as opposed to a literature one. I think in literature, comparatively, you don't get kind of caught up in the action or caught up in the lifestyle or the suspense in the same way that a visual medium can kind of enrapture you and kind of suck you in, So obviously there are some strengths and limitations to the medium. Strengths, I think I've talked about just the amount of precision and detail in terms of visual medium. And the immersion, I think, is really important. So you're immersed in the fictional world because of the atmosphere and because of the setting. Another great thing is that you have a lot of people who are involved in the creative process. So a lot of people are involved in producing, in editing, in writing, directing, and designing the film. That it really allows a lot of people with a great deal of specialties to come together and make a really great product that would not be able to be produced by itself, I think. And another great thing is obviously that directors have a great amount of flexibility in the creation of cinema too. So some of the weaknesses, I think some of the weaknesses are also somewhat apparent. I think you have, unlike literature, more insight, less insight into the psychological state of people. So, if you want to convey the inner mental struggle of a character in a film, I think it's very hard, especially since most film makers and critics think that narration is very tacky. I think so too. I think it takes you out of the experience, and it's a common rule in film to show and not tell, right? So when you try to convey something, you convey it through acting and not through dialogue or through unnecessary amount of exposition and talking. Additionally, I think film, which makes it inferior to almost TV, is that it's not ideal for longer narratives. So films are expected to be a brief but engrossing experience. So in that way, TV is actually a better medium for character development, for a lot of explanation and a lot of a lot longer narrative that takes place over years, and obviously requiring a large budget to even get off the ground, especially in the modern era. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the history of cinema, just in terms of the broad trends that have occurred. Okay, so there are definitely a few precedents to cinema. So a lot of these actually occurred far before even the late 19th century. So we have things like shadowgraphy, camera obscura, which basically takes the outside world and transfers the image to the inside using literally just a pinhole, which is, I think, fascinating. It completely inverts the image though. So it's upside down. And many people have observed that camera obscura is actually the way the eye operates. The brain actually converts the image right side up. And then there's also a magic lantern, which is a very, very primitive form of film that used a slide mechanism. So it's basically like a projector that had a mechanism that could switch slides. But in that capacity, it's so primitive that a film cannot be displayed with such a machine. So early innovations in cinema. So actually getting to where cinema was actually starting to be developed. So in 1878, there's actually technically the first film, The Horse in Motion by Edward Muybridge. And basically it was a series of cameras that were lined up and would take a picture every time a horse crossed a certain point in its path. And then you had sort of a composite series of photos that would kind of stack together and create a video. And the way that actually worked was you have a series of images inside a circle. So a circle, piece of technology, and then inside will be the images lined up right next to each other. And then you could look inside at the images from outside using a little slit, and these slits would be spaced out. And you could actually look at the horse as it's moving because the circle would spin. So I think that piece of technology is very, very cool. And, to learn a little bit about the history is always very neat. And various other developments, in 1893, kinetoscope, which was something you peered into. So it was a peep box viewer. The Lumiere brothers cinematography, which is a series of documentary-like films, which I'll show you. 1896, Méliès, short films that had pretty ahead of its time special effects. And then the end of the 19th century, La Vie du Christ, which had was one of the first films that had more than one shot. So a shot being, when you start filming and when you end filming. And basically more than one shot is a series of shots that are, clustered together. So as an example, you start filming, you stop filming, start filming, stop filming, and then you can put those two panels together. So it was very innovative. And then in 1905, you have Nickelodeons where you could literally just pay a nickel to go in to see a film. And it was basically like a more basic form of a movie theater. So that I thought, learning about this history was really cool. Okay, so we have a few clips. I'll just play this one. Yeah, so here you have the horse in motion. I just think it's really cool just because in addition to just looking at one of the first films ever, you can really see like the anatomy of the horse as it's running and the way it moves. I think is really compelling. And then the Lumiere brothers. We can skip forward here. Okay. So you can see, I mean, it's not really that compelling. It's just footage of people walking out of a building, but I mean, you have to look at the context. It was 1895, and it's really cool because you see you can kind of peer into a moment in history. which I think is always really interesting. And then, for instance, family that's having a nice lunch. And as you look at these film clips that I'm about to show you, moving forward, it's key to realize and pay attention to the various changes in film over time. You can see that not only does the camera quality get better, but the shot selection, the positioning of the camera gets better. All of the elements of film get better. Okay, so from the 1900s to the 1910s, we have the beginnings of sort of film language and the studio system, both of which were really important to the development of film. So this was obviously the beginning of the era of the silent film. There were people who innovated close-up shots, different camera positions, point of view shots, continuous action, films that ran for longer than an hour. And in 1908, the first permanent movie studio. So people were really beginning to take this technology seriously. And then the creation of artificial lighting and low-key lighting, which helped set up kind of the look and mystique of some of these films. And then we had the creation of genres, of course, which was really important to filmmaking in general. And probably the most important director of this time was someone called D.W. Griffith. He was very much an innovative director who really pushed forward the boundaries of film. Fortunately, some of his films featured caricatures of slaves, which was not good. And so nowadays it's not as celebrated, his films. And even his magnum opus, The Birth of a Nation, which is extremely innovative for its time. It's a film that was longer than 3 hours and had like special effects like various coloring screens that you could put on just to change the atmosphere. So yeah, it's really unfortunate. And I think it was one of the first films that was shown to a president, to Woodrow Wilson in the 1910s. So that was really cool. So now getting into the 20s and 30s, we start to get these really important technical elements of film. So for instance, sound and color. So as an example, first talkie was The Jazz Singer. And by 1929, almost all films were talkies. And 1934, it happened one night, witty banter became popular because of sound. In addition, in 1932, color was created, or not created, but was beginning to be used more frequently. So Technicolor basically operates by putting several screens that are different colors on top of each other and layering it so that you get the full spectrum. So it's like red, blue, and green, that you get the full spectrum of color. And in 1932, The Vanity Fair was the first film that actually used Technicolor. And also, in addition to that, even though it was talkies began to be more popular, Chaplin and Keaton kind of came into their own. Buster Keaton. Obviously, I think everyone knows Charlie Chaplin. And City Lights is one of those iconic films that I think will always be a big part of me, because I think it's just an excellent film ahead of its time. So here are a few clips, and I want you to pay attention to also how it's different from the other two clips that I showed you. Okay, so City Lights.
Hey, Brandon, are we supposed to hear sound? It's silent on my side.
Okay, I think I should.
Oh, you just turn off the sound or maybe on the clips?
Yeah, let's see if you can hear it now. Can you hear it?
Nope.
Really? Nothing?
No, I don't hear anything. Jackie, do you hear anything? It's silent. The first two clips, I thought they might be just silent movies.
Yeah. So the first two were silent, but this one.
Okay.
So, Brandon, I think there's when you start to show the video, there's a setting you should click on share
Oh,
the
really?
sound.
When you share screen, I think there's a setting right on the bottom.
Yeah, but when we try this, it works. I don't know why right now. It's not
Did you
working.
turn that on? Like when you share a video
Yeah,
before you start
I'll-
sharing your screen, I think there's a setting
Option
there.
to click share
Yeah.
the sound.
Ooh, hold on. 1 second.
And you do share.
There we go. There we go.
Yeah, you
I
saw
got it, I
it?
got it.
Yeah, click
Yes.
it.
Oh, gotta put in my password.
Yeah, now we hear sound. Good.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, we can cut it off at there, but I think it kind of shows very much the quality of silent film, which is to display a lot of kind of and convey a lot with just actions. So I think in that clip you kind of saw Chaplin knock over the flower and then pick it up, and then you realize because the flower girl didn't see it, and because she's kind of reaching down, that clearly tells us that she's blind. So yeah, I think that's again, great movie. Everyone should check it out. So here's another funny little scene from It Happened One Night. Again, one of the films that were one of the first films to actually use sound, and so part of the reason why I was so critical is because you could actually hear people and you can hear the banter between people, and the chemistry was a lot improved because of the advent of sound. So you'll notice what I'm referring to here. Basically, in this scene, the actor Cable is telling her how to dunk a donut into coffee.
Donut.
Thanks. We rode around all afternoon. Father was frantic. By 6 o'clock, he was having all the rivers dragged.
Say, where'd you learn to dunk? In finishing school?
Oh, now, don't you start telling me I shouldn't dunk.
Of course you shouldn't. You don't know how to do it. Dunking's an art. Don't let it soak so long. A dip and flop into your mouth. If you hang there too long, it'll get soft and fall off. It's all a matter of timing. Oh, I'll write a book about it.
Thanks, Professor.
Just goes to show you. 20 millions and you don't know how to dunk.
I'd change places with a plumber's daughter any day.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny, that scene. So again, the whole movie is a great film as well. Highly recommend. Okay, so moving on to the next couple of decades. Again, this is precisely why I had the disclaimer, because again, it's very much a gloss over much of the history. So from the 40s to the 60s, I would generally say it's an absurd rise in the sense of creativity in terms of art. So US film in the 40s was heavily influenced by the Second World War. So a lot of films that came out in the 40s were actually very patriotic films. And you see a lot of the sort of American patriotism in films like Casablanca, 1942. And gradually towards the end of the 50s, 50s and 60s, you had studio systems that were beginning to decline because of filming abroad. So many of these studio systems that you see that popped up, such as MGM, Warner Brothers, were all beginning to decline because many stars and many different great films were being filmed abroad. And so this period was an actual golden age for European and Asian cinema. And many modern filmmakers that are still working today were very influenced by the films in this era. And so I'll show you a few. And of course, I mean, this era, we're talking about 3-decade spans. So again, a high level gloss over, but you have films like Citizen Kane, Casablanca, On the Waterfront, 12 Angry Men, The Graduate, 2001, A Space Odyssey. And especially in Europe, you had directors like Francois Truffaut, Jean-Luc Godard, Federico Fellini, Ingmar Bergman, and Hitchcock all make their directorial debuts in this era. I think that's obviously incredible. And I think this is my favorite era in terms of European cinema, for sure. And in Asia, you had people like innovators in Japan and India, especially with 1953's Tokyo Story, which is classic, and Satyajit Ray's Apu trilogy, which influenced Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, a bunch of great directors, and Akira Kurosawa, who directed Rashomon, Seven Samurai, and Yojimbo. Again, Kurosawa's influenced essentially every director that came after him. So again, this is it's unprecedented time in overseas cinema. I would say probably my second favorite era behind the next one, which I'll show you in a second. But here we have a lot of clips because I wanted to show one from each decade, and you can see the progression of time with each of these films.
Small business insurance is usually...
These ads are a bit annoying, but eventually they'll pass.
Come on, boys!
Okay, so this is Citizen Kane.
Charles.
Kane.
Pull your muffler around your neck, Charles.
Kane, I think we shall have to tell him now.
Yes. I'll sign those papers now, Mr. Thatcher.
You people seem to forget that I'm the boy's father.
It's going to be done exactly the way I've told Mr. Thatcher.
There ain't nothing wrong with Colorado. I don't see why we can't raise our own son just because we come into some money. If I want, I can go to court. A father has a right to. A boarder that beats his bill and leaves worthless stock behind. That property is just as much my property as anybody's, now that it's valuable. And if Fred Graves had any idea all this was going to happen, he'd have made out those certificates in both our names.
However, they were made out in Mrs. Kane's name.
He owed the money for the board to the both of us.
The bank's decision on all matters concerning...
I don't hold with signing my boy away to any bank as
I
guardian.
want you to
just
stop
because...
all this nonsense,
The bank's
Jim.
decision on all matters concerning his education, his places of residence, and similar subjects is to be
The
final.
idea of a bank being the guardian.
I want you to stop all this nonsense, Jim.
We will assume full management of the Colorado load, of which I repeat, Mrs. Kane, you are the sole owner.
Where do I sign, Mr. Thatcher?
Right here, Mrs. Kane.
Larry, I'm asking you for the last time. Anybody'd think I hadn't been a good
The sum of
husband, a father.
$50,000 a year is to be paid to you and Mr. Kane as long as you both live, and thereafter to the survivor.
Well, let's hope it's all for the best.
It is.
why I can't raise my own boys more than I can understand.
Go on, Mr. Thatcher.
Everything else, the principal as well as all monies earned, is to be administered by the bank in trust for your son Charles Foster Kane until he reaches his 25th birthday, at which time he is to come into complete possession.
Charles! Go on, Mr. Thatcher.
Well, it's almost 5, Mrs. Kane. Don't you think I'd better meet the boy?
I've got his trunk all packed. I've had it packed for a week now.
Yeah, so again, you guys might be curious as to why this clip is really important in terms of overall cinema. But basically, I'll go back and show you. Basically, this particular scene, I think, does an awesome job of having characters both in the background and the foreground. And so what I mean by that is having characters spaced out in the scene. So obviously you have Charles Foster Kane, who's all the way out in the snow. Then you have his father right behind the two in the front, and then obviously the lawyer and the mother in the front. And so basically, this scene is somewhat symbolic. So basically, Charles Foster Kane is the most outside in the background because he has the least control over his destiny, and his father is attempting to argue with his mother, but basically he has very little control over the outcomes of the letter of the signing, and his mother is the one who's in control completely. So she's all the way in the front of the camera. So again, I think Orson Welles did an exceptional job actually putting people in certain spacing and situations where it looks where some people look more in control and others look more in inferior control. Okay, and then we'll show you another clip from one of my favorite films, Vertigo, which is by Alfred Hitchcock. Oh, sorry.
I love you.
Yes.
And if you lose me, then you'll know I loved you and I wanted to go on loving you.
I won't lose you.
Let me go into the church. Alone.
Why?
Madeline! Madeline! Madeline!
Okay, I'm gonna cut the clip right there because the rest is kind of a spoiler. But basically in this scene, one of the pioneering camera effects used here is a retrograde zoom. Basically what you do here is that you pan the camera, which means that you move the camera while you're zooming. So again, a great piece of innovation. Again, a great instance of film progressively integrating techniques over time. Okay, and finally, we have a relatively longer clip, and this is, again, one of my favorite films. again, I guess I should introduce this. So this is 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I think this is one of the most important scenes in the entire film, and I'll elaborate on it. Yeah, okay. I'll just cut it there as well. Basically, without any, I guess, information or context of the scene, it's pretty hard to interpret. But the underlying message is relatively unique, and I think is one of the great scenes in cinema. Just because, again, we have this transition from an ape to a space station. And again, most of us are probably wondering what any relation there is between the two. But upon further context, we realize that it's explaining the relationship between, humankind's ability to use tools, and then those tools accumulating and aggregating until you get to a point where humans are able to construct these machines that fly through space. Again, the whole idea is that tools are what made humankind exceptional. And so that's supposed to be the purpose of this clip. I just thought, why not show one of the most iconic clips in cinema history? So I thought that was really quite fascinating. Okay, so in the 1970s to the 80s, we really have an increase of people who are really interested in an increase of filmmakers who are interested in telling their own story and having a lot of creative liberty and in their artistic direction for films. So in terms of auteur theory, what it really means is it's a French word. Auteur directly translates into author, but in reality, what it means is kind of the person who creates the film, the director, should have the final say in the creation of films, and should have their creative liberties, as much creative freedom and liberty as they can in terms of creating a film. So I'll show you. So basically, in this era, what you had was a lot of filmmakers, because of the decline of the studio system, actually create and pioneer their own filmmaking. And so this new Hollywood era is probably the most exciting era in cinema history, especially this time between the 1970s to the 80s, because you had so many directors who were really being pioneers in the industry in general. And basically auteur theory also, I should mention, comes from some of those directors that I showed you. So if I look at, in Europe in the 1940s to 60s, the ones who actually created the idea of auteur theory was Francois Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard in the Cahiers du Cinéma, which is the journals of cinema. And they've pioneered this idea of having a lot of creativity, a lot of freedom to do whatever people please with cinema and take it to new heights and extend the boundaries further than they've ever had. So I think this idea is so essential to film. And because the studios weren't there, actually a lot of filmmakers had a lot more control, and this was probably the most prolific period in film history. So obviously, I mean, if you're interested in film, or you kind of have some passing understanding of film, a lot of these names will ring a bell. So for instance, Martin Scorsese in 1976 and 1980, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, iconic films in the history of cinema. Steven Spielberg, 1978, Jaws, 1981, Indiana Jones, Francis Ford Coppola, who I think created some of the greatest films of all time, The Godfather and its sequel, as well as Apocalypse Now, George Lucas with Star Wars, Woody Allen with Annie Hall, Manhattan, David Lynch made his directorial debut as well, and Stanley Kubrick with some of his classics, and an underrated director, Robert Altman, and of course, Roman Polanski and Ridley Scott as well. So again, every single one of these names have left their mark, I think, in film history, and I think it's really an exceptional display of talent in this era, by far my favorite era in film history, I think. And so, yeah, every single one of these directors you should check out if you have the opportunity to. And these are all U.S. films, United States. So that's the even more exceptional part, is that this great deal of activity came from one period in the United States. So here I'm going to show a brief clip from The Godfather, which I think is probably, if not the greatest, probably at least in the top 3 greatest films of all time. Again, I should preface that I should say something before. This scene is a violent scene, so if you're opposed to shooting and violence, I would be careful. Just maybe turn your eyes away for this scene, but it's a great scene. It's an iconic scene, and basically in this scene, I want you to pay attention to both the sound. So pay attention to the sound and the acting, the subtle facial cues that are given in the scene.
I'm glad you came, Mike. I hope we can straighten everything out. I mean, this is terrible. It's not the way I wanted things to go at all. It should have never happened.
I want to straighten everything out tonight. I don't want my phone bothered anymore.
You won't be.
This is a longer
I
scene,
swear
so
on my children. But you gotta keep an open mind when we talk. I mean, I hope you're not a hothead like your brother Sonny. You can't talk business with him. You do vorraggia.
Che tu vas a sapere che ho aiutato la famiglia Tattaglia. Io credo che ci potrebbe mettere un accordo. Io voglio pace. E lasciamo perdere che tutti sti cazzati.
Ma vuoi giocare?
Che?
Come si dice? What I want, what's most important to me, is that I have a guarantee. No more attempts on my father's life.
What guarantees can I give you, Mike? I'm the hunted one. I missed my chance. You think too much of me, kid. I'm not that clever. All I want is a truce.
I have to go to the bathroom. Is it all right?
You gotta go, you gotta go. I frisked him. He's clean.
Don't take too long.
I frisked 1,000 young bucks.
Intendi me? Nicolò, tu mi capisci, no? Sei italiano come tu padri? Tu padri sta male. Quando tu sta meglio. Il cambio ti fa un giù e mettiamo tutto a posto. Steve sta via. Si deve finire.
Okay, we're gonna cut it right there. Yeah, I think you can guess what happens next, but yeah, again, the facial cues, the buildup of the sound of the train, again, it's just a really iconic scene. So again, obviously, I think The Godfather goes without saying that it's a must watch. Here's a movie from the 80s, Blade Runner by Ridley Scott, which I think is one of the greatest films in the sci-fi genre. And basically, the scene is seeing Harrison Ford, the character of Harrison Ford, the actor Harrison Ford is interrogating a woman to see if she's a replicant, which means if she's a robot. And one of the very cool lighting tricks that Ridley Scott uses is to reflect light off the inside part of the retina. So you'll see that here, and it's pretty obvious, but it's a very cool scene visually speaking.
Girl.
Is this testing whether...
Magazine, you come across a full-page nude photo of a girl.
Is this testing whether I'm a replicant or a lesbian, Mr. Deckard?
Just answer the questions, please. You show it to your husband. He likes it so much, he hangs it on your bedroom wall.
I wouldn't let him.
Why not?
I should be enough for him.
One more question. You're watching a stage play. A banquet is in progress. The guests are enjoying an appetizer of raw oysters. The entree consists of boiled dog.
Would you step out for a few moments, Rachel? Thank you.
She's a replicant, isn't she?
I'm impressed. How many questions does it usually take to spot one?
I don't get it, Tyrell.
How many questions?
20, 30 cross-referenced.
It took more than 100 for Rachel, didn't it?
She doesn't know.
She's beginning to suspect, I think.
Suspect? How can it not know what it is?
Comment.
Okay, another scene I'm gonna have to cut short because running low on time. But this I think scene is really excellent in terms of not just like the lighting of the pupils and stuff, but I think in terms of the atmosphere created, the setting and the space. I think the smoke, for instance, really constructs a sense of mysteriousness, and yeah, the whole scene is pretty incredible. Whole movie is incredible. Okay, so in the 90s to 2000s, I think probably most of us are familiar with the films that came out in this era. It's blockbuster and independent era, pretty much. The 90s and 2000s were also a period of flourishing, and independent studios and independent cinema actually flourished during this time. Many blockbuster classics were from this time. So, for instance, Terminator 2, Jurassic Park, Forrest Gump, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and Pirates of the Caribbean, and great classics were created in this era as well. So, of course, Martin Scorsese, being the director that he is, continues to excel even in these decades. But then you have, of course, Quentin Tarantino, who really comes into his own in the early 90s. And you know, he's seen a really prolific production since then and up until modern day, I would say. Simultaneously, the Coen brothers made their first few films, which I'm a huge fan of their films. I think they're incredibly philosophical and very deep in richness and in thought. And David Fincher, of course, David Lynch, Paul Thomas Anderson, and Richard Linklater. Linklater being one of my favorite directors. And here we actually have finally some Chinese directors. So Wong Kar-wai, who directed Chungking Express and In the Mood for Love. You all may know those under different names, but I've provided the name here in Chinese. Ang Lee, who directed Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Zhang Yimou, who directed Hero. And these are all really important films, I think, for Asian cinema too. So they've essentially put China and Hong Kong on the map. And then you have, of course, great Korean directors Park Chan-wook, who directed Old Boy, and Bong Joon-ho, who's my current favorite director, who directed some really great films in the 2000s. Okay, so here we have a scene from Goodfellas. Again, I'm gonna have to cut this clip short because it's a
Grammarly can help you write.
It's a longer clip, so I'm gonna have to cut it short. Basically, it's a really nice long shot, but I think I'll just cut it right from here, and I think you might have the idea. Hold on.
You know what I mean? Huh? I like going this way, better than waiting in the line. How you doing? Good, good. What's up? Here you go. How you doing, Gino? Hey, how are you? Good, good. Hey, good. Every time I come here, every time you two, don't you work?
Nice to see you.
Yeah, good seeing you.
Hi, how are you? Anthony, right in the front.
Great, great, thanks.
Anything you need, Henry, just let me know.
Hey, how come we can't get...
I know you're waiting for me. I'll be right with you.
I have another train, cuz. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Thanks. Hey, how are you guys doing?
Okay, yeah, that's it for now. It's relatively, it seems like a relatively simple scene, but you realize that it's all one take. So they follow this couple throughout the building in the path that they're taking, and I think it's really impressive because again, these sort of long takes are sort of difficult to get right precisely, and most people choose to do several shots. To make it easier for themselves. That's how most films are shot. But this particular scene, I think Scorsese felt the need to follow and see the various different interactions Henry has with his surroundings and the people around him. So, and then No Country for Old Men. Okay, so this scene is very different in tone. The scene is very different in tone. And basically, it's a very high tension scene. So yeah, I really like the scene. We can watch maybe like half of it.
How much?
69 cents.
And the gas.
Y'all getting any rain up your way?
What way would that be?
I seen you was from Dallas.
What business is it of yours? Where I'm from? Friendo?
I didn't mean nothing by it.
Didn't mean nothing.
Just passing the time. If you don't want to accept that, I don't know what else I can do for you. Will there be something else?
I don't know. Will there?
Is something wrong?
With what?
With anything.
Is that what you're asking me? Is there something wrong with anything?
Will there be anything else?
You already asked me that.
Well, I need to see about closing now.
See about closing?
Yes, sir.
What time do you close?
Now, we close now.
Now is not a time. What time do you close?
Generally around dark, at dark.
You don't know what you're talking about, do you?
Sir?
I said, you don't know what you're talking about. What time do you go to bed?
Sir?
You're a bit deaf, aren't you? I said, what time do you go to bed?
Oh. Somewhere around 9:30. I'd say around 9:30.
I could come back then.
Why would you be coming back? We'll be closed.
Yeah, you said that.
Well, I got to close now.
You live in that house out back?
Yes, I do.
You lived here all your life?
This is my wife's father's place originally.
You married into it?
We lived in Temple, Texas for many years. Raised a family there in Temple. We come out here about 4 years ago.
You married into it?
That's the way you want to put it.
I don't have some way to put it. That's the way it is. What's the most you ever lost on a coin toss?
Sir?
The most you ever lost on a coin toss?
I don't know. I couldn't say.
Call it.
Call it?
Yes.
For what?
Just call it.
Well, we need to know what we're calling it for here.
You need to call it. I can't call it for you. Well, it wouldn't be fair.
I didn't put nothing up.
Yes, you did. You've been putting it up your whole life. You just didn't know it. You know what date is on this coin?
No.
1958. It's been traveling 22 years to get here. And now it's here. And it's either heads or tails. And you have to say, call it.
Well, look, I need to know what I stand to win.
Everything.
How's that?
You stand to win everything, call it.
All right. Heads.
Okay. Yeah, I'll cut it off right before they reveal it. But if you want to watch the rest of the scene, I urge you to watch the movie in its entirety. It's an exceptional film. Okay, so again, we're running low on time, so I just want to get through this as much as I can. And I think we're if any of you guys are familiar with the contemporary film scene, it's pretty self-evident, most of these conclusions. There's Disney domination, there's the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Star Wars, Disney remakes, CGI and virtual effects are super big now. There's the rise of streaming services as a more convenient form of entertainment. And then there's also uniquely the reinvention of the horror genre through smaller production companies like A24. So here are some really great films from 2010s to 2020s. I guess 2020 is kind of really recent, so there's not many films there. But again, this whole list of films again have been very influential to me. Again, I've watched most of these, and I can say without hesitation that these are the films that I appreciate the most from this era. Again, there's a clip from Parasite that I intended to show, but because we're running a little over time, I think I'm just going to gloss over that, and you guys can watch it for yourself. So overview and analysis. So a brief overview of cinema evolution based off of the history that we've seen. I've drawn some conclusions. So technically speaking, I think there's been a series of evolutions that have taken place in cinema that I've observed. So there's an early technological development of the medium from the early part of the 1900s, rapid innovation of film technique and formalization of film language throughout the mid 1900s to the late 1900s, experimentation and innovation in narrative and style with the directors, especially during, like I said, 1970s to the 1990s. And then now in the present day, commodification, which means people selling movies and making movies to make a lot of money, which is inevitable. I think a lot of industries start to go towards that direction. And then there's polarization between people who are interested in experimenting and innovating on art and people who are, I guess, interested in profit generation. And I wanted to compare this movement with other similar movements just to get you to understand that this is not unique to cinema. Like, a lot of these histories are actually very similar because they all undergo similar evolutions in the media. And this is kind of the main thesis of my argument here today, is that most of these different mediums and forms of art undergo similar development. And I think this is the most intriguing part of my presentation. Unfortunately, I'm already like an hour 15 in. So to talk a little bit briefly, again, history of music, we have early technological development from 50,000 BC to 600 CE, creation of technique and language from the medieval times to Western classical music, formalization of style in what we know as classical music, so Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, all the way to Tchaikovsky, to Debussy. And then now we have music that's produced by music industry. So it's more profitable, you get it digitally on your phone. There's a massive industry for popular music. There's also, still people who are experimenting with different forms of music in terms of, different forms of style and reinvention of the scale system. So it's really cool. And history of painting, very similar. Early technological development from wall paintings to murals and panel painting. And then you get formalization of technique and style from the Renaissance to Romantic eras, with interests in anatomy and depth and lighting and Da Vinci to Goya. And then you have the commodification and the modernization. So now you have paintings that are bought and sold all over the place in auctions. You have it on your walls everywhere. And then you have, from the 20th century to 21st century, you have very abstract representations of reality. Again, this is very heavy gloss over. And then the history of literature as well. Then you have the early technological development of literature in the ancient era. Then you have the fall of Rome to medieval, where you have fables and stories. And then you have the formalization of style in Renaissance to Romantic period. Again, look at this. I mean, the Renaissance to Romantic is the same history of music, history of painting, history of literature. I would say for me, the Renaissance for film was in the 1970s. Again, I prefer the 1970s, but again, because people really came into their own, So you have Don Quixote to Shakespeare to Van Goethe, right? This is a really innovative time. And then you have modern experimentation, again, like Joyce and awesome authors like that from the 20th century to the 21st century. And you have more marketable literature now in terms of science fiction and pop literature. So you understand my main thesis is that all art undergoes some cycle of technological development where the medium is first being used, and then kind of a formalization period where people start to learn how to use the medium, how to excel at it, how to create their own style. And then once that style is beginning to be more and more used, people get interested in experimentation. but that crosses into conflict with the market interests, which are interested in selling art that's more pleasurable and that's more is more fleeting experience, right? So again, commodification and polarizations. Again, the negative attitude would be that almost all art forms end up being seen as commodities. They're artistic pieces that are less valuable. And then larger corporations see this trend continue with the digital media. We see this trend continue into the digital age with more profitable companies and larger art industries. And many film directors, as an example, are saddened by the state of cinema because they're worried about the death of the movie theater. And now you have the bigger and bigger gap between people who are really interested in, creating really great art and innovating in that artistic space, and then who unfortunately don't receive as much financing because these are riskier projects. And then you have the generic blockbusters which are less risky and receive bigger budgets because they're less risky and because they'll generate bigger profits. They end up going a different direction. So again, you have this discrepancy, I think, in general, with almost all art forms. So basically, is this a problem? Although we hope for continual innovation, commodification is not necessarily a bad thing. People have their own tastes and experiences from art. So people have different expectations, people want different things. And it's important not to gatekeep or to be elitist or to be, have some sort of specific taste that no one else that doesn't accept any other form of art. So reinvention of the medium is part of the creation of art, and even pop art and blockbusters are valuable. Okay, so this includes like your Marvel movies or whatever or what have you. Hopefully the art industry will try and learn to finance and support struggling artists. So that's one of the main points that I want to raise is that production companies should invest in artists that care about the industry, right? Or that care about making good art, right? And this is hard because good art is difficult and risky. But again, financing talented artists is super important. And I think taking some risks would do the industry well, I think. Again, less the gap between really artsy films and high budget blockbusters, because you miss that middle area where there's a lot of financing and a lot of great, ideas. So what could the future of art look like? I think the future of art could be, very, very different from the present reality we're part of. So first and foremost, content could become shorter and shorter over time. So content is getting shorter and shorter over time, but especially artistic content that is taken seriously. So YouTube and TikTok all showcase rapid short forms of content. I anticipate that people will eventually come to accept these shorter forms of content as forms of art. So this might end up displacing cinema, hopefully not, but I think it will be a great substitute as well, especially if people allow for an investment of resources into that space. TV content, I talk mostly about films in this presentation, but TV content is so amazing because it has the ability to draw out a narrative for a longer time. And so it might be facing greater growth and financial support in the future. And hopefully projects like that will allow us to look at characters with a more in-depth lens and tell all the stories that should be told. And of course, untapped genres. For instance, in the 2010s, horror was developed and innovated upon in the latter half of the 2010s decade. So hopefully other genres have that opportunity to shine as well. Okay, yeah, that was really fast into the presentation, but I'll field any questions if there are any. I know I ran over my time, but really appreciate everyone listening because it was a lot of information. Thank you.
Wow, that was such a comprehensive and in-depth walkthrough.
Yeah.
Cinema history and art history, I guess, overall. That was awesome.
Yeah, I wanted to elaborate a little bit more at the end, but again, I didn't want to go too much over. I already went a lot over, but
it's okay. It's okay. For people who are interested, they will stay.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
This is Linda.
Oh, hi. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Brandon. Number one, thank you very much. Really appreciate you putting all this effort and create such interesting and presentation. I think even though I know very little about movie, but the one thing I agree with you about the future, you say the content will become shorter. And that's what I found out I'm doing. I like to watch things interesting, but not be too lengthy. If I like lengthy, I will watch I lost the word, TV, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for long story. But for film, like a shorter version with a lot of artistic creation, that's tend to draw my, attention. I don't know if you have more things to say about that, but thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I finally get time to like relax and calm down. But basically, I think with art in general, I think the reason why we have shorter content is because we have an availability of content unlike ever before, where you're able to access it in a very convenient way. So for instance, YouTube is so popular because you can watch a video halfway and then like stop and then go do something else and then come back, watch a different video. And so it's very convenient, and I think people are becoming more used to that. So people, I think, spend less time really reading for instance, a whole book, I don't know if it's easier nowadays, but reading a 600-page book is like tough now because your attention is so limited. Same with watching a film too. Even like just a 3-hour film is long, exhausting, depending on the subject matter. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I'm not irresistible to that either. Like I'm not able to resist that, because I also feel like I get somewhat bored easily, but I'm learning to expend more of my attention to be able to appreciate more kinds of art. But if it ends up being like the content is shorter, like I'm okay with that. Like I think that's just, if people can be creative in that space, who knows? It could be really, really fascinating to see where the industry goes.
Yeah, I think with the social media, with the information, so much information is overwhelmingly, it's everywhere. That's why people in general, people have like shorter attention span, things like that probably. By the way, I just want to mention Linda, who just spoke. She's our teacher for the group. Usually she gives us art lectures, and thanks, Linda, for the comments and compliments. Yeah, anyone, if you have a question or comments, please just go ahead and.
So, Crystal, this is Julie. Can you hear me?
Hi, Julie. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Brandon. So nice. The whole walks us through the whole movie history. So actually, you talk about most of like narrative movies, right? So it's very interesting. That's most is my most favorite movie category. But as Andy you mentioned, right, nowadays people have shorter spans with new technologies, right? So definitely I think in the future they're gonna be like more collaborative view of the movie. Maybe less knowing about the avant-garde, the movie type, film type. Maybe in the future will be like people can participate, right? Really interact with RV, virtual reality, all the stuff, right? So people probably can really participate in the movie. That's what I'm thinking. And also with the art, right? So some people say movie just pop art because it's really commodity, right? It's entertainment tools, whatever, right? But some other people also thinking movie is really highest art form. I don't know how you take it, because people thinking It's take the writing, photography, drawing, painting, animation, music, everything together. So if that's a true statement, that means, movie will never be replaceable. What do you think about that? I don't know. That's what I'm thinking. Because you talk about the movie, the art form, right? I think, it's really interesting, maybe people can discuss, and I want to see your opinion about this.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think, okay, well, virtual reality is absolutely an amazing, I think, medium for exploration of different ideas and concepts. I think, I think, for instance, that's being done somewhat, almost less well, maybe somewhat well in the video game space. So video games, most of them are for pleasure and entertainment, but there are some really good video games that I've played that really go far into the artistic process of telling a really genuinely good story. With regards to whether people will treat cinema as its own thing, I do think so. I think, for instance, just because cinema is a thing doesn't mean that people don't go to theater shows anymore. Like, people still go to watch like Hamilton. People still go to watch, Chicago or like other theaters, theatrical displays. But I think it depends on how much more films can be innovative still, because I think, for instance, literature is at a point where it's very hard to be innovative and to be hard to be taken seriously, because you're always compared to like really great artists. Like, oh, you're not William Shakespeare, or you're not like, I don't know, like Williams Wordsworth or something, or some great artist, right? Because you're always being compared to previous artists. So people might be more likely to engage in a new artistic space because it's less, saturated with other works, So I think it's very valid. I think people should do as much as they can with AR, because it's an untapped space. It's really untapped, and I think people could do some really amazing things. But it's hard to say, because sometimes, you have technology that you think is going to be like, oh, the next space where everyone's doing this, right? Like, everyone's going to make augmented reality pieces of art. But then people go and choose to do something else because, it's maybe more enticing. I don't know, but we'll have to see. Yeah, sorry, that was really...
No, I thought that was a great idea, AR, augmented reality. I remember there was a movie, have you watched that movie? I remember Woody Allen has a movie. It's called Purple Rose of Cairo. Remember, have you watched that one?
I haven't, no.
That one was the actor inside the screen actually walk out of the screen and meet up with someone in the audience. So that's
really interesting.
Yeah, that's right. That's the idea of the augmented reality.
Yeah.
you actually merge the screen and the actual reality audience.
They do that. I remember I went to Universal Studios, and they had like a Terminator movie, and then people would like jump into the screen and then jump out.
Like
yeah, I mean
3D kind of movie? Or?
Yeah, it was like a 4D movie. It was really interesting.
4D, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Like Jurassic Park, the latest Jurassic Park had that 4D movie. You actually, your seat actually moves, rocks with you, and
yeah. I think the only problem with that would be like, again, like I said, the products in the digital age need to be really easily accessible. So if you're to do like a 4D thing, it might be hard to like have people actually come to each theater to actually act it out. So I think that would make it more difficult. But yeah, right. I think that could be interesting. I mean, who knows?
Or maybe I'm thinking maybe people can, film really or something, right? Because now it's just short budget, right? So you just made the first something, and the next one you just be part of the movie, make your second one, right? Just really on, right, to the next one. So eventually, maybe there's an endless theory. Who knows?
Yeah, that's true. It could happen for sure. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point that you brought up, though. Thank you.
Hello. Hi.
Oh.
Hi, my name is Sherry. And
Hello.
thank you, Brandon, for such a wonderful presentation and come through the history of the cinema development and really learn a lot from you.
Mhm.
And I'm very interested, all of the clips you showed us was very interesting. And
Oh, thank
this
you.
one particular question, I know Charlie Chaplin was very famous for silent movies. We all heard his name, but I have never myself watched one single movie
Oh, it's
that
okay.
he made. And the ones you showed, the city lights,
Mhm.
I noticed actually music played a very important role in those movies. I wanted to know, is the music all the way through for the silent music, or only because I think the music is trying to say something, help.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I didn't mean to cut you off. You can keep going.
No. I'm just saying, I didn't know it's the music all the way through. So the music was very important in those movies, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The silent movies.
Absolutely. I think, because they didn't have the part of the problem with silent films, the reason why they were silent was not that, the whole experience is silent. I don't expect that you thought that, but basically, it was hard to record sound during that time when you're actually on the film set. So they could add music after in post-production. So they would add it
on
onto
top
the
of
film.
it. Okay.
And it's really important actually, because a lot of the music actually helped to convey a lot of the emotion for each of, for every action, for every gesture. A lot of the film, the music was really important to explain the narrative, because even
I
if
felt
you're
that way. Yeah.
even if you're looking at the film, sometimes you don't understand the emotional cues because you don't have anything to tell you kind of what these characters are kind of feeling, because there's so much going on. So I think that's a valid point. And yeah, music is always valuable. It sets the tone.
Right. The soundtrack is a big part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another
Absolutely.
thing is, are you able to maybe send some of the key slides to Crystal so we can have a copy? Because I'd like to follow some of your leads and maybe watch a few.
I'm so
sure Brandon will share the slides with us, right?
I'm so glad you said that, because I don't know, I was afraid there was too many films, but oh my God, each of them are so good. So
yeah. I would love to follow, because it's very clear you listed the key ones in each time period and famous. I think for a lot of us, we follow the stars more than the director names, and so I think this maybe his style. It's easy to just look at the director and appreciate from that direction. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll just add on to that. If when in future situations, right? I think directors impress their creative vision almost even more than any of the individual actors do.
That's
so and I think acting is obviously in and of itself an art form too. So again, I can completely relate to stars. I love Matt Damon and stuff. I love movie stars too. So yeah.
Sometimes some movie stars, like some actors, they tend to collaborate with the same directors for many movies, right? Because they have the same they work, they collaborate well, things like that. Yeah. So sometimes follow the actor is not necessarily the wrong or lesser path, right? Because sometimes you do see similar type of movies, or they have their own styles too.
Yeah, and the actors are very important to the process of conveying emotion. So each actor has a different way of going about their business. You're not going to get the same performance from the same actor playing the same character. So yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think the best movie, you can recognize the director's impact on the scene. You can easily, notice that those are the ones you can. It's not just the actor or actresses.
Oh yeah.
Performing, but the impact from the actor.
I mean, if you watch some more films, you'll see just such a distinctive style among each of their films. It's so it's definitely very deliberate. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Do we have more questions?
Welcome all questions. Yeah. Anything's fine.
Okay, I guess it's already 9:40.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we'll wrap it up. And Brandon, you will share the slides with us, right? I can either maybe just send the whole thing to our group, or maybe just take out the main. That I think there's people more interested probably in the movie recommendations. All right then. Thank you for Brandon